plays and criticism about theater. And so in the same issue, which was the 5th issue of 1958, articles on Beckett and Dvořák's first play appeared simultaneously in the same issue. And that launched his career as a playwright, because 3 months later, he managed to stage the play in one of the most important theaters in Poland, in Teatr Powszechny in Warsaw. As I said, the fall was cooling off a little bit, so the play was not called The Police because of censorship. It was called Policeman. Oh, this is not an attack on the institution of police. This is just a few bad apples. Policeman. Also, there were a few other things that sort of were not palatable, so that had to be changed. But nonetheless, he was able to perform it with these changes and come to a very successful career as a playwright in Poland, which he left in 1963. And the rest of his career was peripatetic, with a long stop in Mexico. That was the longest place where he lived from in the 80s and 90s. But before that, he was in France, he was in the United States, and that's where he wrote the majority of his most famous plays: Tango, Václav. You've probably, these are plays that probably have been performed here out at sea. Yeah. So when we've always been kind of in dialogue. Yeah. I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago, and in 2015, I was commissioned to translate some project because Ziggy and Leila had an idea of bringing Dvořák to American universities, taking kind of a tour, and I was commissioned to translate a short story and 2 plays because they needed to be refreshed. They were not made for the 21st century. So when it started off, I don't know if you remember, but it started off with a translation of a short story, Elephant. So I crafted this, short story. When the actors got it in their hands, they pronounced it dead on arrival, unperformable. It was so, and I was by then, a published translator with, a few major awards, and I was like, oh my God, what have I done? My work is just completely being rejected. Well, I never really thought about translating for performance. So in order to wrestle with the translation of Police, I took it first. The first stage was actually making sure that it reads and sounds good, that there is a space for breath, that there's a space for germination of thought, that where kind of ideas can kind of be produced in the moment of utterance, that there's this kind of space that will allow for that. So I performed it in our house. I invited friends, and last minute, one of the friends that was supposed to play the chief of police did not show. So my son, who was 7 at the time, was given the biggest role of his life, the chief of police. And he ran to the bathroom, made himself a huge mustache. And for about an hour, we were quicker actually than you guys. It took us about an hour and 10 minutes. But he read, the part. Yeah. So this is how it you know, and then what was it, about a month ago,
Yeah. The original idea was to do this festival in the fall, but we have the opportunity to do it now, and Kate will talk to that too about getting everything ready in a matter of three and a half weeks, I think.
Yeah, I think we were talking, I can't remember how we started talking, but I think you said, would you be interested in directing a show for the Absurd Festival?
Yes.
I said, okay, so looking at possible Beckett, looking at possible other absurdist playwrights, and then Leland Ziggy gave me two Mrozek plays. One was The Police, and the other one was The Party. The Party. And it was about 6 weeks ago, and I took The Party and I started reading it, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I was very, I haven't directed a lot of absurdist plays. I've directed comedies, but when I started reading The Police, it was like night and day. It was like, oh my gosh, and I'm reading it very quickly, and I tore through it, and I said, this. Because it felt relevant, it felt timely, it felt like today, it felt all of these things. I mean, the two pictures hanging up, and these two men, an infant king, and you know, kind of thing. And so I just thought, right now, yes. And how do we do it? It's like getting a cast really quickly and starting rehearsals really quickly. And we had our first rehearsal on my birthday, April 6th. And then we just worked really hard at getting it together for last night. Yeah. But in the meantime, I was Zooming with Joanna every, few days. We were both at the end of term, so we both had grading and projects and things that we were trying to get done. But we made a point to talk to each other about their translation, and actors would come in with what about this line? What about this line? Or can we think about this? And so it was a dialogue throughout the process with the translation.
Well, so what was really different about this time is kind of the experience of change in technology. The pandemic gave us the kind of ability to communicate remotely via video. So I was actually, first we started to correspond via email, then we went to phone, then we went to Zoom, then I received an invitation to actually be able to watch you guys rehearse, which was amazing to me. And of course, you had some ideas about what needs to be changed. Some of it came with changing the gender of the prisoner, which has been very interesting because it brought out a tradition that of women revolutionaries actually who threw bombs at important political figures, including Sofia Pietrovskaya, who in 1881 produced a bomb that killed Alexander II. Yeah. And in the Revolution of 1905, also, Dora Brilliant, which means diamond in the rough in Russian, she was actively involved in making bombs to kill political figures. So your decision, when I heard, you were very shy about, like, I am thinking about changing the gender. How does it start?
I'd already cast someone.
Watching Kay was amazing because she has an incredible method of making you arrive at a solution that she's already made months ago, So this was very kind of oh, would you mind if we did this? And of course it was, and I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. This is, the women revolutionaries are just, being, in a way, alluded to, which was a kind of a strategy for Mrozek, not to, the bomb was so remote and so much in the past that it didn't alert the censors, because no one, in 1958, no one was throwing bombs at, communist rulers. But it allowed us to kind of bring this moment of history that has been a very, very interesting one, because these women oftentimes had pangs of conscience and were not eager to kill people. In fact, they had this theory about, being sacrificing themselves and having to suffer themselves in order to be able to kill someone. So here you have the bone that does not harm anybody, which again kind of was the dream of these women. They wanted the change without the carnage.
And it's so interesting because I didn't know any of this prior to casting, but what I did want is more women on stage. That's kind of always my goal is how can I have, and with a play that is all men, written for all men.
Except for the very traditional.
Except for the traditional wife of 2 pages, so I really wanted to see more women on stage, and how can we do that? Yeah.
Just one more question before opening up. Kim, when you're directing the police, it has all these absurdist techniques, but it's political satire. How do you, with the actors, and you guys can chime into if you want, how do you bring the humor and the message of the play to the?
Well, after our first read through here, the next week I think in the second or third rehearsal, I had a PowerPoint presentation on absurd theater, because I hadn't directed anything, and because it's the Theater of the Absurd Festival, I wanted to really bring that on the table. And once going through it, I realized this play, it fits into some of the categories of absurd, but it also doesn't fit into some of that. So we started the actors and I started talking about this idea, and Eileen, the assistant director who worked on the show as well, thanks very much, Eileen, instrumental to the success of the show. We started talking as well about the idea of political satire, and I think Eileen brought it. She did some dramaturgy work for me as well, and we were talking, and so this idea that it's really an overlapping and really blending of these 2 genres. And in terms of how to work with the actors, I think just having to open up the conversation about it. There's nothing that I don't think, and you guys can speak to this, there's nothing you can play about theater absurd, and nothing that you can play in terms of political satire, but I knew I didn't want, there's a very pointed, and for me, poignant note from the playwright at the beginning of the play that really wants it played in a certain way. He talks about it's not a comedy. Well, I think it is a comedy, but it shouldn't be played broadly. It shouldn't be played for Keystone Cops kind of thing. And that's one thing that I know I kept steering actors to make sure that we don't go broad, that we really keep it in the reality of the world that we're creating. And so that's kind of really, do you all have anything to say about a theater absurd, political satire, that kind of thing? Chris?
Well, just about that, so that there's this note that he writes. It's about 1.5 pages long before the script, and it says, "Nor is this play, God forbid, a comedy." And I'm like, okay, well then what? So as we beat it out, as we figure out all these turns, there's a lot of turns of intention. There's a lot of turns of what are they going after that are not included with stage direction. He does not. There's very little stage direction, which I normally very much like, but there's a lot of turns where we have to figure out what's actually being played here, and then structurally, it has a lot of archetypal commedia dell'arte characters. The general is Dottore. I'm the Capitano. Tropolino. So there's a typical math to the comedy, and it's there in the script. And then he's got this letter at the front of it. It's like, well, you've written out all this mathematical comedy that's still difficult to figure out the math of. And then on top of that, you say it's not a comedy. So there's some kind. So then I wonder, what is it like as a young man in 1958 writing about? Well, don't play it as comedy. Well, what does he think is comedy in 1958 in Poland? What is the standard that he is pushing off against? He's writing before he saw Monty Python. He's writing before he saw Armando Iannucci stuff. So what is he basing it off of? So he gives a nice note in the beginning of like that it should be, what is the word? It's not stone-faced, but it's stern-faced maybe? Something about
Straight-faced.
Straight-faced. The performance is straight-faced. And I think you folks got a much better run of that today. We're still figuring it out. But there's some kind of, there's a style available in the text, and it's what do you do with that? So that's I think we're still finding it in performance.
It's what's really cool about this. Again, this is something that you haven't been privy to because these are the notes to the actors. But translation is collaborative. Theater is collaborative. So one thing that he was very clear about is, I can tell you what this is not. This is not comedy. No, this is not this. But I won't tell you what it is. It is for us to figure it out. So again, for the director, for the actors, in this case for me as a translator, to figure out what the play is about. And being able to kind of watch you guys arrive at what the play is about, and kind of being able to be kind of part of this magic of theater, of figuring things out, was really a privilege. You know, it was so interesting, and we're still figuring out what this is about. And because with good literature, it's never, you know, there are layers, you know, of things. So.
And I was just telling Ziggy right before we started talking, it's like having an audience helps figure out what it's about as well.
Exactly.
And so having the audience only for the second time today is like, I'm already learning more things, our actors are learning new things, like what's working, what's not, what do we need to do, that kind of, like 120 versus 110, okay, that's an idea, right? You know, so what do we do?
Speaking of audience, do you guys have any questions or any comments or anything? Yes.
So I'm just curious, who came up with the idea of the salute to the infant and the uncle? That was great because it gave us a chance to laugh.
It was a collaborative, actually, effort, and you know, you kind of rewarded it because, see, when I saw you guys rehearse, you were trying to arrive at how do we deal with that repetition. So each person had their own sort of style of reacting to it. And it was very helpful to have this is Case doing sort of the portraits that were kind of the frames that were empty. So I said after watching this, you know, one thing that I'm kind of thinking about is, why don't we have this whole phrase treated as a unit? And then it like kind of led you guys to do the gestic text, which is, you know, the salute with a clicking of the boots, and sort of this kind of almost like it became like a refrain or leitmotif of the show that again you rewarded it with laughter. Yeah. I don't know how you. I mean, you guys should. You know.
Well, it was funny because she was on a Zoom, and then she had to leave the Zoom. I didn't know she left, but I saw a little a note in the chat, and I'm like, what's the note in the chat? She goes, it'd be good if you put all this together.
Like as a single movement.
Yeah, as a single movement. Yes, yes, sir.
Hi, I want to talk a little bit about the content of this. And I get that even in this relatively small context here, of moving out to larger humanity, there's so much self-interest, self-protection. And even within this police force, you can sort of tell that they're so obedient to this thing, and they don't like it, but they're protecting themselves, each one, in terms of a self-interest sort of thing. And I think we're experiencing that today, here in this country, which is very disturbing. And to me, rhetoric has a lot to do with it. Rhetoric is, I think, the science of proving your point. And sometimes it has no limits. In other words, sometimes the point of rhetoric is to make it difficult for the other side, even though it's not really truth. And you could see all this rationalization going on amongst these characters to protect themselves. So I just wanted to say that's sort of what I saw, and what disturbs me about the nature of human beings. When they get in groups, they try to justify their point of view and even be defensive or be protective from another's point of view. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So, once all these performances are done and all the verbiage is tweaked, will you be publishing this version?
Yes, the idea is, and again, it's an idea that kind of I had about 10 years ago, and then kind of, certain things, life interferes, but I wanted to do Rozhik shorts because it's a 3-act play, so we'll have several 3-act plays, plus his short stories, plus maybe he was also a very gifted satirical artist. So, his first works were actually his drawings, satirical drawings, so maybe just putting it together, and I found out that Beata Pich is actually in touch with Rozhik's wife. So, I mean, I have a kind of an opening, and to return to the but thank you so much for.
One more question and then we have to prepare for the demo. Yes.
I'm just curious if there was anything that you couldn't or had to shape in the Polish to the English. The nature of the language in Polish, I wonder if there were any difficulties.
Sure, absolutely, because I mean it's these you're translating not just the words but the worlds.
Yeah.
And again, we're responding to a current political situation where certain things become even more relevant. And we are able to see certain things that we wouldn't have been able to see about 15 years ago or 20 years ago. So everything from even the differences in the fact that English has definite or indefinite articles, whereas Polish doesn't. So the police, a police is a huge difference. Police. So even a tiny thing, has meaning. So you have to be very careful and look. There's so many things that are found in translation in English. They're not possible to say in Polish. So you kind of look what's working there. What can we do to respond to the current political situation, to the current times, to where our attention should be drawn? And good art, good, play does that, gives you opportunity.